We've touched upon the concept of be-have, and that naturally leads us into the very heart of the matter, the limbic system. Now, why limbic? Honestly, the etymology is a bit murky, like trying to figure out why socks are called socks. But the idea stuck because these structures were clearly tied to emotion. Early on, there was a big debate. Was it all about smell, the olfactory bulb or rhinencephalon, or something broader, the limbic system? Well, if you're a rat, sniffing danger is pretty much feeling danger. For them, olfaction and emotion are practically synonyms. But us primates, we're more visually driven when it comes to emotional triggers. Still, the core idea holds. This system is fundamental to the feelings that drive our actions, for better or worse. Now, let's get real. When you think about the brain, you might imagine neat little boxes labeled anger center or lust center. Cute, right? Wrong. It's way messier than that. Think about bending your pinky finger. There's a specific spot in the motor cortex that does that. Regulating breathing, body temperature. Sure, there are dedicated regions for those. But feeling annoyed, horny, nostalgic? Protective yet contemptuous, love? Nope, no single center for those complex, nuanced human experiences. That's why the wiring between these limbic structures is so darn complicated. It's not a simple switch, it's a tangled web of connections, reflecting the multifaceted nature of what we feel. So, how does this emotionally charged limbic system actually get its hands dirty with the rest of the body's operations? Enter the hypothalamus. Think of it as the crucial translator, the diplomat sitting right at the border between the ancient core regulatory systems layer 1 and the newer emotional circuits layer 2. It gets tons of information flows from the limbic structures. Hey, something scary happened. But then, it sends out signals disproportionately to those older, more primal parts of the brainstem and midbrain. Why this imbalance? Because it's the main highway for the limbic system to exert control over automatic bodily functions. It's the bridge where feelings meet physiology. Let's talk about the autonomic nervous system, or ANS. This is the body's autopilot, handling all the things we don't consciously have to think about: heart rate, digestion, pupil size, you name it. Imagine a reptile working hard. Its muscles send signals up, the brainstem says more oxygen. Heart rate increases, blood vessels constrict. Eat too much? Stomach stretches, signals go up, gut blood flow increases. Too hot? Blood rushes to the skin to cool down, all automatic. And guess who's the key player making sure the limbic system can talk to this autopilot? Yep, the hypothalamus. Feel terrified? The amygdala screams to the hypothalamus, which then tells the ANS, get ready to run. That's how your feelings physically change your body state. Now, let's break down the ANS into its two main players: the sympathetic nervous systems and the parasympathetic nervous system. Think of the SNS as the body's alarm system, the one that kicks in during exciting or threatening situations, the famous fight or flight response. It's responsible for that surge of energy, the quickened heartbeat, dilated pupils, maybe even a bit of sweating. The classic joke is it handles the force, fear, fight, flight, and sex. Basically, anything that gets your adrenaline pumping. Its main weapon? Norepinephrine, shot out by nerve endings throughout the body. There's one tiny exception: the adrenal glands, where instead of norepinephrine, they release epinephrine, the stuff you hear about in emergencies. Same basic effect, just a different delivery mechanism. And then there's the parasympathetic nervous system, PNS. The SNS's calm cousin. While the SNS is revving you up, the PNS is bringing you back down, promoting rest, relaxation, and recovery. Think of it as the rest and digest system. If the SNS speeds up your heart, the PNS slows it down. If the SNS shuts down digestion during a crisis, the PNS turns it back on. It uses a different neurotransmitter, acetylcholine, to do its work. Interestingly, this system also plays a role in social behavior. If seeing someone in pain activates your SNS, you might be too stressed yourself to help. But if the PNS is engaged, you're more likely to offer assistance. It's the difference between being overwhelmed by your own distress versus having the capacity to act compassionately. Okay, so the limbic system influences the body via the hypothalamus and the ANS. But there's another major pathway: hormones. The hypothalamus is also the boss of hormone release from the pituitary gland, which then signals other glands. We'll dive deeper into that in Chapter 4. The key takeaway here is that emotions don't just affect the body directly, they also influence the hormonal soup bathing our brains. And guess what? Those hormones and autonomic states constantly send feedback signals back to the brain, subtly shaping our thoughts and actions, often without us even realizing it. It's a continuous loop, a conversation between mind and body mediated by the limbic system. All right, let's bring in the heavyweight champion of the brain, the cortex. This is the shiny, wrinkly surface, the bark of the brain, the newest evolutionary addition. It's where we process sensory info, plan movements, understand language, store memories, make decisions, do math, and generally exercise our high-level thinking skills. For centuries, thinkers like Descartes emphasized this split between cool logical thought and warm fuzzy emotion. But science tells us that's a false dichotomy. Look at how the temperature of a cup can bias our judgment of someone's personality, or how emotions color what we remember. Stroke patients who lose speech can sometimes sing what they want to say, rerouting through emotional pathways. The cortex and lymphic system are deeply interconnected, constantly talking to each other. It's not a top-down command structure. The limbic system has a voice too. This idea of the cortex and limbic system being tightly linked wasn't always mainstream. Back in the 1960s, the brilliant neuroscientist Walla Nauta at MIT made a groundbreaking observation. He meticulously mapped the connections going into and out of the frontal cortex. What did he find? Massive two-way communication lines running directly to and from the limbic system. His conclusion? The frontal cortex isn't just sitting there issuing commands, it's deeply enmeshed with the emotional core. He proposed it was almost an honorary member of the limbic system. Can you imagine the reaction? People probably thought he was crazy. The fancy frontal cortex slumming with the limbic system. But Nauta was right. They constantly influence each other, collaborate, argue, inhibit, stimulate. It's a dynamic partnership, absolutely central to understanding behavior. Quick detour, brain lateralization. We've got two hemispheres, left and right. Most structures come in pairs, like two left amygdalae and two right amygdalae. Often these pairs have slightly different jobs, though related ones. The most famous example is the cortex. You've heard the stereotypes. Left brain equals logic, language, detail-oriented. Right brain equals creativity, intuition, big picture. Sounds neat, right? Well, reality is usually messier. The differences are often subtle, and popular culture tends to exaggerate them wildly. Calling someone left-brained means they're a bean counter, and right-brained means they're an artist. Overly simplistic. Let's mostly ignore the hype and focus on the actual functions. Okay, let's zoom in on one of the stars of the limbic show, the amygdala. Nestled deep within the temporal lobe, beneath the cortex, this little almond-shaped structure is arguably the poster child for the limbic system. It's heavily implicated in aggression, and studying it gives us huge insights into aggressive behaviors. Think of it as the brain's emotional alarm bell, constantly scanning the environment for threats or rewards. So, how do we know the amygdala is involved in aggression? The evidence is pretty compelling, using standard neuroscience techniques. First, correlation. Stick electrodes in the amygdala of various animals, and guess what? Neurons fire when they're being aggressive. Measure brain metabolism during aggression, and the amygdala lights up, consuming extra glucose and oxygen. Then causation. Lesion the amygdala and aggression drops significantly. Give it a temporary knockout shot with Novocaine, aggression pauses. Zap it with electricity or spray an excitatory neurotransmitters, and aggression pops up. In humans show angry faces, the amygdala activates. Stimulate it surgically and patients can fly into rage. And the most telling cases involve people with amygdala damage from disease or surgery, who struggle to recognize anger in others' faces. It paints a clear picture. Now, things got really controversial in the 1970s. Some doctors tried using psychosurgery, specifically bilateral amygdalotomy, to treat severe uncontrollable aggression, often in people whose seizures started with violent outbursts. This sparked massive ethical debates. Who decides what's pathological aggression? Who gets the knife? Were certain types of aggressive individuals targeted more than others? What even counts as a cure? The results were murky. Yes, in epileptics where aggression was seizure-linked, removing the amygdala helped. But when done purely to control behavior, the outcomes were all over the place. Success rates reported anywhere from 33% to 100%. Different patients, different surgeries, different measurements. It was just too sloppy. Thankfully, this practice has pretty much died out. Two infamous cases often cited in this context are Ulrike Meinhof and Charles Whitman. Meinhof, founder of the RAF terrorist group, was found hanged during her trial. An autopsy later revealed that remnants of a tumor removed years earlier were pressing against her amygdala. Then there's Charles Whitman, the Texas Tower sniper. A high IQ engineer, Eagle Scout, seemingly stable guy who went on a rampage. He left notes expressing confusion and love, requested an autopsy, and indeed a glioblastoma was found pressing on his amygdala. Did the tumor cause the violence? Probably not in a simple cause and effect way. It likely interacted with his troubled past, including abuse and prior aggression, creating a perfect storm. These cases highlight the complexity, but also the potential biological underpinnings of extreme violence. Okay, so we've talked aggression, but if you ask experts who study the amygdala, their number one association isn't aggression. It's fear and anxiety, and the evidence for its role in fear is just as strong, if not stronger. Lesion on the amygdala, animals become less fearful. Record its neurons, they fire during fear. Stimulate it, fear emerges. Genetic studies confirm it. In humans, seeing scary things activates the amygdala, and the more it activates, the more visibly scared people get. One study used a Ms. Pac-Man variant where getting caught meant a shock. As the scary dot approached, the amygdala lit up, especially if the shocks were strong or the dots started activating far away. People with PTSD have hyperactive amygdalae, reacting strongly to minor threats and taking longer to calm down. It's also sensitive to ambiguity, like card games where you don't know the odds versus ones where you do. Social uncertainty, like a monkey worried about losing his mate to a rival, activates the amygdala. Even conforming to group pressure lights it up. Researchers can even manipulate specific amygdala circuits to turn anxiety on or off in mice. Clearly, the amygdala is the brain's fear headquarters. How do we learn to be afraid? Sometimes it's innate, hardwired. Think of a rat automatically fearing cat scent, even if it's never met a cat. This core fear response involves the central part of the amygdala. We're all predisposed to fear certain things like snakes and spiders more easily than others, like pandas. That's prepared learning. Then there's learned fear, things we associate with bad experiences, like associating a certain neighborhood with danger, or the sound of a doorbell with a bad surprise. This involves the basolateral amygdala, or BLA. Joseph Ledoux's work beautifully illustrates this. Pair a neutral tone with a shock repeatedly. Initially, the tone does nothing. But after conditioning, the tone alone triggers fear. Ledoux showed that auditory input activates BLA neurons. Repeated pairing strengthens the connection, allowing those BLA neurons to now excite the central amygdala, triggering the fear response. Synaptic changes occur, making the connection stronger. And how do we unlearn fear? Not by forgetting. It's active extinction learning, driven by inputs from the frontal cortex telling the BLA, that tone is okay now, overriding the original fear pathway. The amygdala isn't just about raw emotion. It plays a role in complex social decisions too. Take the ultimatum game. Player A proposes a money split. Player B accepts or rejects. Reject, and neither gets anything. Economically, accepting any offer makes sense. But humans reject unfair offers often out of anger. Brain scans show that when people reject unfair offers, their amygdala is active. People with damaged amygdalae, they tend to be unusually generous, even when offered ridiculously unfair deals. They understand the rules, can advise others logically, but they lack the usual distrust or vigilance. The researchers called this pathological altruism, not because they're bad, but because they haven't learned the necessary caution through negative social experiences, thanks to the amygdala damage. It suggests the amygdala teaches us to be wary in social interactions, starting from a default state of trust. Here's a quirky twist. The amygdala also pops up in male sexual motivation, although other parts of the hypothalamus handle the actual performance. Why the amygdala? One study had men look at attractive women while in a brain scanner. Just passively looking activated reward areas, but actively working to see the pictures also lit up the amygdala. It seems the amygdala isn't primarily about the pleasure itself, but about the anticipation, the uncertainty, the anxiety surrounding the pursuit of a potential reward. It responds strongly when the value of a reward changes, or when the threat level changes. Some neurons track increases in reward value, others track decreases in punishment severity. They're sensitive to change, regardless of whether it's good news or bad news. It captures that anxious, unsettled feeling inherent in many pursuits, the corrosive vein mentioned in the text, the mix of desire and dread that often accompanies striving for something valuable. So what information flows into the amygdala? Plenty. Sensory inputs are crucial. The BLA gets direct projections from all senses, bypassing the cortex for speed. This allows for a rapid, albeit sometimes inaccurate, emotional response before conscious processing is complete. Think about the Jaws theme music. You feel scared before your visual cortex fully registers the shark. This shortcut is powerful, enhancing fear conditioning. Even someone with cortical blindness can still recognize emotional expressions via this route. Pain signals also go straight to the amygdala via the periaqueductal gray, a structure linked to panic. And the insular cortex, which handles disgust from taste and smell, sends a fascinating signal to the amygdala. This link extends to moral disgust. Betrayal or injustice activates both insula and amygdala, driving feelings of outrage and the urge for revenge. Crucially, this social disgust pathway doesn't activate if the betrayal comes from a computer, highlighting its role in social dynamics. What does the amygdala do with all this input? It talks back. It modulates the very inputs it receives, influencing how sensitive the cortex or other areas are. A key connection is with the hippocampus, the memory center. Normally, the hippocampus learns facts, the amygdala learns fear. But during intense fear, the amygdala hijacks the hippocampus, coupling the emotional event with the contextual memory, making it incredibly vivid and long-lasting. Think about remembering exactly where you were during shocking events. The amygdala also has direct outputs to motor pathways, allowing for super-fast reflexive actions, like jumping back from a perceived threat. Again, speed comes at the cost of accuracy, potentially leading to impulsive reactions. Finally, its major output is arousal. It projects to the hypothalamus to trigger the hormonal stress response and to the brainstem to activate the sympathetic nervous system and suppress the parasympathetic system. It also activates the locus ceruleus, flooding the brain with norepinephrine to heighten alertness. This pattern of amygdala output tells us something important. The SNS, the body's alarm system, is activated during intense experiences like fear, fight, flight, sex, winning the lottery, scoring a goal, solving a complex problem. It's not just about danger, it's about salience. In mice, some hypothalamic neurons are involved in both sex and aggression. This has implications. First, autonomic feedback can influence how intensely we feel things. Heart racing makes everything feel more intense. Second, and crucially, fear and aggression aren't automatically linked. Your heart beats similarly in rage and orgasm. Fear doesn't always lead to aggression, and aggression isn't always fueled by fear. Think about psychopaths. They show remarkably low amygdala reactivity to fear stimuli, and their violence seems cold, calculated, instrumental, not reactive or frenzied. The amygdala's role is complex, not a simple on switch for aggression. Having explored the intricate world of the amygdala, that ancient emotional powerhouse, let's shift our focus now to the brain's most recent and sophisticated addition, the frontal cortex. The author candidly admits they spent decades studying the hippocampus, but wishes they'd chosen the frontal cortex instead, calling it the most interesting part. Let's see why. What does the frontal cortex do? It's got a massive portfolio: working memory, executive function, organizing, strategizing, planning, delaying gratification, regulating emotions, controlling impulses. Basically, it's the conductor of the brain orchestra, making sure everything plays in harmony towards a goal. The author nails it with a simple definition. It makes you do the harder thing when it's the right thing to do. Think resisting temptation, sticking to a diet, planning for the future, managing complex projects, controlling impulses. It's the most recently evolved part of the brain, packed with unique genes, disproportionately larger and more complex in humans. And crucially, it's the last part to mature, often not fully developed until our mid-20s. And it has unique cells, the von Economo neurons, found only in species with highly complex social lives, hinting at its crucial role in social cognition. Within the frontal cortex, there are distinct subregions with specialized functions. At the very front is the prefrontal cortex, PFC, the decider. It resolves conflicts, choosing between options, often weighing cognitive goals against emotional impulses. Once decided, it sends commands down the chain, PFC to premotor cortex to motor cortex to muscles. How does this look cognitively? Consider dialing a phone number you haven't used in years. The PFC doesn't just recall the number, it strategizes, remembers the area code, remembers to dial one first. It's about flexible, goal-directed thinking. It's also crucial for task switching and focusing. Need to switch from looking for a taxi to checking traffic? The PFC gets active, suppressing the irrelevant stream of information. And it's essential for pattern recognition and categorization, like figuring out how to remember a grocery list by grouping items, fruits, spices, etc., imposing an executive strategy. Studies show PFC neurons coding for categories, even distinguishing hybrids between dogs and cats based on proportions. All this high-level thinking and self-control takes a toll. The frontal cortex is incredibly metabolically expensive when it's working hard. Tracking rules, resisting impulses, making complex decisions, it burns energy. This makes it vulnerable. Push the frontal cortex too hard, and performance on subsequent tasks declines. Multitasking, which often involves the PFC juggling multiple streams, also taxes it. And here's a fascinating consequence. Increase cognitive load and people become less prosocial, less charitable, less helpful, more likely to lie, and more likely to cheat on diets. Our capacity for self-control, managed by the frontal cortex, seems to be a finite resource. The frontal cortex shines brightest in social contexts. Across primates, bigger social groups correlate with a larger frontal cortex, especially in species with complex social structures like fission fusion groups where individuals split and merge. Human studies also show a link between the size of your social network and the size of certain frontal regions. It seems managing social complexity demands this brainpower. The PFC tracks different kinds of information in social decisions, balancing personal rewards against advice from others. Monkey PFC neurons even activate when they make a mistake or see another monkey make one, suggesting social learning. We constantly use our frontal cortex to do the harder things socially, praising bad food, refraining from hitting, resisting advances, maintaining decorum. It's the seat of our social intelligence and self-restraint. To truly appreciate the frontal cortex, consider what happens when it's damaged. The quintessential case is Phineas Gage. In 1848, a tamping rod blew through his left cheek and exited out the top of his skull, carrying away a huge chunk of his frontal cortex. Miraculously, he survived, but the man who came back was unrecognizable. Gone was the respected foreman. In his place was someone fitful, profane, impulsive, obstinate, capricious, unable to plan or follow through. Friends said he was no longer Gage. He became a traveling exhibit. Yet, remarkably, he did improve somewhat over time, eventually working as a stagecoach driver. Perhaps his remaining right frontal cortex compensated for some lost functions, showcasing the brain's incredible plasticity. Other conditions highlight the frontal cortex's role. Frontotemporal dementia (FTD) often starts by attacking the frontal cortex, killing those unique von Economo neurons first. Patients exhibit disinhibition, inappropriate behavior, apathy, and a lack of initiative. The decider is failing. Huntington's disease, caused by a genetic mutation, destroys motor circuits but also damages the frontal cortex early on, leading to involuntary movements plus behavioral issues like stealing, aggression, hypersexuality, and compulsive gambling. Strokes in the frontal cortex can also cause disinhibition. Even normally, during REM sleep when we dream, the frontal cortex shuts down, which is why dreams feel so bizarre and illogical. The brakes are off. And during orgasm, the PFC also temporarily silences, allowing for intense emotional release. Perhaps the most chilling link is between frontal cortex dysfunction and criminal psychopathy. Studies by Rain and Keel found that compared to non-psychopathic criminals and controls, psychopaths show reduced activity in the frontal cortex and weaker connections between the PFC and other brain regions. Furthermore, a surprisingly high percentage of violent offenders have a history of head trauma specifically to the frontal cortex. Now, correlation isn't causation, and it's clearly not the whole story. But it strongly suggests that deficits in this region, which governs impulse control, planning, and moral reasoning, may play a significant role in the development of antisocial and psychopathic traits in some individuals. Finally, let's revisit that old dichotomy between thought and emotion, but now focusing specifically on the frontal cortex itself. It's not monolithic. Roughly the dorsolateral PFC FDO-PFC is the rational cognitive part, the decider of deciders, focused on utilitarian, goal-oriented thinking. It's the seat of doing the harder thing. Damage it, and people struggle with planning, delaying gratification, and making strategic choices. Silencing it temporarily makes people accept unfair offers in games, unable to implement fairness goals. On the other hand, the ventromedial PFC, VMPFC, closer to the midline, is heavily connected to the limbic system, embodying Nauta's idea of an honorary limbic member. It's about integrating emotional valence into decision-making. Damage the VMPFC, and people can still understand options logically, but they struggle with social and emotional decisions. They might rationally agree that killing one person to save 5 is wrong, but they can't feel the emotional weight of it. They become overly utilitarian, poor judges of character, and unable to learn from negative emotional feedback, even if they intellectually grasp the lesson. Antonio Damasio's influential theory argues that the VMPFC runs internal simulations, gut feelings to guide choices, and removing it leaves people unable to access this crucial emotional input, leading to poor, often cold decisions. So, the dichotomy is false. Both cognition DLPFC and emotion VMPFC are integral parts of the frontal cortex constantly interacting. So, we've journeyed through the limbic system, focusing on the amygdala's role in emotion and behavior, and then explored the intricate world of the frontal cortex, the seat of higher cognition and social control. The key message is that these systems aren't isolated islands. They are deeply interconnected, constantly communicating, shaping our thoughts, feelings, and actions in incredibly complex ways. Understanding behavior requires understanding this integrated network.